it would take nearly 23 years to solve a murder where the answers were close to work. Hello, true crimerers. This is the solved cold case of Kevin Hughes. Viewer discretion is advised. Before we get started, please make sure if you want to see more content from me in shorter form, hop on over to my TikTok page, also called Making a True Crimerer, and that will be in the description below if you forget. I have well over 2,000 videos over there, so we have a lot of watching to do if you've never seen that over there before. I wanted to mention real quick because someone had mentioned why my page is called Making a True Crimerer. I just realized that there are plenty of people who follow me here on YouTube who have never seen my TikToks before. So real quick, my favorite true crime docu-series goes without saying at this point, but it's Making a Murderer. So my page is named after that. It's a play onto that. So Making a Murderer, Making a True Crimerer. It's not a real word, but I just thought it was clever-ish, so that's why we're called that. Okay, on to today's story. Kevin Hughes was born on October 29th, 1965 in White County, Illinois. He spent a good chunk of his life in Illinois, but eventually, as he got older, he wanted to move closer to, or directly to, Knoxville, Tennessee, because he had a passion for music. Not so much for him to be a musician, he had a passion for the behind-the-scenes work, if you will, in the music industry. In particular, he was really in love with country music. And he had this kind of like weird thing with ranking songs and whatnot. You know, like what was the top song of the year, you know, that kind of thing. And that eventually would become his actual job. Co-workers of Kevin's would describe him as a deeply religious man and a very caring individual. He was a kind person, and he was one of the most trustworthy individuals you would ever meet. And this is someone who lives by that kind of honor code, and he would never fall into the wrong crowd. And if he did, it would have been on accident, and he would have gotten out of that crowd. In 1986, while living in Tennessee, he got a job for a very well-known magazine, if you will, called Cashbox. Now, Cashbox began in 1942, and it really seemed to focus primarily on country music. And it was a published magazine that quickly took off and became a crowd and fan favorite. What they did was they were a jukebox ranking system. So I guess what that means is it monitored the spins of jukeboxes, and this was they got this information from all over the nation. They also tracked radio plays and record sales. Something to be said about it is that it became a very easy to corrupt system. The music industry as a whole, the business side, looked at magazines like this and would see who was ranked towards the top. And then those top people would be more likely to get profitable record deals. You know, like record producers would look at these individuals at the top of the list and offer them contracts, offer them deals. So this is something that possibly members of the country music world could try to bribe people to maybe get themselves closer to the top of that list so that they can boost their careers. This is something that Kevin would not really ever want to participate in. It was not his style. It was not his purpose in life to cheat records like that. He really wanted to rank the actual legitimate rankings, and the person who's at top should be the person who is actually the one at the top, not someone that paid for it. So he started there in 1986, and it was a much smaller operation back then. He had a few coworkers, and he was there for several years until his unfortunate death. Kevin was a very diligent, very hardworking individual. He wouldn't just clock in 9 to 5 and right as the clock struck 5, he left the building. He would sometimes stay 1, 2, 3 hours later to make sure his job is done. He was very proficient. He truly was like the ideal worker for any business. And he eventually became the director for the chart-topping lists. And this was a big, big deal, not only for him personally, but this was a big deal in the music industry. He now had a significant amount of influence. On Thursday, March 9th, 1989, Kevin was at work, and he was working past his end time. So around 8 or 8:15, as he was still working, a friend of his, an aspiring country singer himself, his name was Sammy Sadler, and they were pretty good friends. He came by the office to just sort of hang out and talk with Kevin, and eventually they decided to leave and go to dinner. So around 8:30, 8:40 p.m., Kevin turned off the lights and left the building, and the two of them would go to a restaurant. And it's also important to note that this was a very impromptu decision. This was not something that was planned ahead of time. It was just, hey, do you want to do this right now? Okay, let's go. By all accounts, the dinner went great. They had a great conversation, and after they left, they made another unprompted trip to somewhere else. At Sammy's request, they went to Evergreen Records, and that is where Sammy worked. They decided to go there because it was really close to the restaurant they were at, and Sammy wanted to give a phone call to his parents real quick. So they pulled in, and both men went into the building, and as Sammy went to the phone, he made his phone call to his parents. This call lasted roughly 10 minutes or so. During the phone call, Kevin and Sammy overheard someone jiggling the handle of the building. They had locked it when they went inside. And even though Sammy was on the phone, he heard it too, just like Kevin did. He's like, what was that? So Kevin got up from his chair and he walked out to the front of the building and he peered out the window. And what he saw was what he described as a thin black man walking away from the building. Apparently he was not positive the man was black himself or if he was just wearing a lot of very dark clothing, and it was very dimly lit, so he truly didn't get a good look at this individual. But he just assumed that the man thought the place was open and then realized it wasn't and then left. After the phone call, which was about 10 minutes in length, the two of them then left the building, and then Sammy locked the door. They then began to go towards Kevin's vehicle because Kevin was the one driving them around. And Kevin got in the car, and then Sammy got into the car. He sat down, and as he was grabbing the door to close it, a man dressed head to toe in black clothing was basically right on top of Sammy, and he had a .38 caliber revolver pointed directly at him. And before Sammy could do anything, the man fired the gun and shot Sammy directly through the arm. And then he quickly reached inside and shot once towards Kevin. Kevin was hit, but not in any kind of, not in a location where it would have knocked him out or killed him instantly. He was able to get up out of the car and he began to sprint down the road. And this man decided to then chase him down the road, and he's pointing the gun at him, and next thing you know, he's firing the gun, and he shoots Kevin, this time in the back of the head, and he falls down flat on his face. The killer then calmly walks up to Kevin, who's on the ground, and fires one more shot into the back of his head. And then the killer, at this point, he just bolted. He fled the scene. An ambulance was called. There were people outside who witnessed this and called police really quickly, but the man was already far gone. And when the ambulance got there, Kevin was pronounced dead at the scene. He had 2 bullet wounds to the back of his head. Sammy was rushed to the hospital. He did have a pretty serious injury to his arm, but he did recover and he pulled through. Police immediately were like, okay, why did this happen? What's the motive? Because, both men had money on them. They had their wallets, they had, credit cards and cash, but nothing was stolen. They were probably wearing expensive, watches, for example. Nothing was taken. This appeared to be a hit, is what it looked like. And the target really truly seemed to be Kevin. Sammy, by all appearances, looked like he wasn't expected to be with Kevin that night. And so he just sort of got shot randomly, but Kevin seemed to be the one they were after. It did not take long for rumors to fly through Nashville and go through the music industry as a whole. This really rocked the country music industry. This rocked the, ranking industry. It really just hits to the very core of this little world. The very first thing that people said that this probably was a hit because Kevin worked in the ranking industry. He was one of the top people in the business there in Nashville. And is it possible that he was bribed to rank someone up higher, but he refused? That's the theory that the people were out and about talking about. Police gave it some thought, but they didn't have any proof of this. They looked into, Kevin's office. They looked through his files. They looked through everything they could look through. They could not find any evidence to suggest that he was a part of any type of scheme like that directly. Police also said this particular job didn't seem to be important enough to murder someone over. And in reality, yeah, you would probably think that. The fact that it was or looked like a professional hit also crossed the minds of police, but they wondered if this was like a professional hit job, if this was someone who was hired to do this. Why did they not finish Sammy off? Why didn't they kill him too? And why did it take such a weird route? If this was a really good hitman, why didn't they just shoot Kevin directly to the head once and also the same to Sammy? This looked like something that someone who didn't really know what they were doing was hired to do, and they kind of just fucked it up a bit. Maybe there was someone in the country music industry that had some animosity towards Kevin. Maybe there was a grudge developing. Maybe a certain person felt they should have just naturally been higher on this ranking list, and Kevin, who did a lot of work, who put a lot of thought into this, a lot of research, he didn't rank them. So maybe someone got mad and just took out their aggression on him. That's a possibility. Now, real quickly to touch on Sammy, he went into surgery basically the night that he was shot. There was a severe amount of nerve damage done to his right arm. Unfortunately, he has not been able to play the guitar pretty much ever since. He can still sing, but playing the guitar is very, very difficult for him. And yes, police looked into Sammy, and in terms of did he do this? There were about 4 other witnesses who saw this other person shoot Sammy and then shoot at Kevin. Plenty of people saw it happen, so Sammy wasn't like the shooter and then pretended to shoot himself kind of thing. They also looked into would he have hired someone to do this, and they couldn't find anything along those lines. Sammy definitely truly appeared to be an innocent party in this, who was very likely the wrong place at the wrong time. The case then just went really, really cold. There was such little evidence. The only thing police really had was the shooter dropped their hat on the ground and never picked it up. It was a World War II veteran's hat. It had a picture of a combat infantryman on the front. It said World War II veteran and damn proud of it. So obviously they were looking into people who may have served in World War II, who were veterans at the time, but they didn't find anything. So like I said, the case just went super cold. The hat was really all they had. They know the ammunition that was used, the type of gun that had to be used, but there are tons of those out there. So yeah. In 2002, a former co-worker of Kevin Hughes was arrested and charged with the murder of Kevin. His name was Richard Tony D'Antonio. He was the one to actually get Kevin the job at Cashbox. This man had a history of drug charges, robbery charges, various other petty crimes under his belt. Police went back to, and this is basically cold case detectives at this point, they looked back into the theory of possible bribery with the ranking system. And what they discovered was that Kevin discovered that D'Antonio and another man, his name was Chuck Dixon. Chuck was an actual record producer at Cashbox. The kind of creepy thing is that this man, Chuck, he actually was interviewed on the show Unsolved Mysteries when this case had originally aired. And he was, all about like, oh, who did this? Let's find out who did this to Kevin. But what police eventually learned was that Chuck Dixon was behind the scheme to take bribes from country music stars to rank them higher on this chart so their careers can get a boost. And Kevin had found out that this was going on. They told, so Chuck and D'Antonio both tried to convince Kevin to be a part of this scheme, but Kevin, who was a very honorable person who didn't want to have anything to do with it, said no. And it's believed he was going to reveal what was going on. How they got to this was that a witness would come forward, and this person was very scared back in, the late 80s, early 90s when this investigation was going on, but a person came forward that said Chuck Dixon had mentioned that they were going to take care of a problem. The problem being Kevin not wanting to help with this and wanting to tell people what was going on. So the witness said that Kevin needed to be handled or gone. And then apparently the person was told by Chuck Dixon, if you say or do anything to rat us out, you will be gone just like Kevin. So it is believed that Chuck went to D'Antonio and said, take care of this problem. And so D'Antonio was essentially the hired hitman who clearly had no idea what he was really doing. And he followed Kevin that night, and sounds like he was frustrated because Sammy, who wasn't supposed to be part of this, sounded like he was frustrated because they were together the whole night and they were like super impatient. So he finally accosted them and did what he did. And he was also the man who tried to open the door at the Evergreen to go inside. And he is the man that was seen by Kevin when he looked out the window. Another witness came forward when police reopened this case to say that they had in fact sold a .38 caliber gun to Mr. D'Antonio just days before the murder took place. And that D'Antonio, when he purchased the gun, tested the gun in the backyard of that person's home. And unbelievably, those bullets were still in the backyard. So police were able to collect them. And one of those bullets was a match to the same bullets that were fired at Kevin and Sammy that night back in 1989. One of the reasons police did not look into D'Antonio very thoroughly back in 1989 was because his wife had given him a very, very good, very promising, seemingly airtight alibi. Turns out, she lied for him because, again, he threatened her. So she had no choice but to lie about the alibi. So she would come forward, 20 plus years later to tell police this is what happened. In terms of Chuck Dixon, he was not brought to prosecution. He was not arrested because in 2001, a year before all of this came out, he died. Even though he was the one to hire the hit, he never had to face justice. But at least D'Antonio was still alive, and he was arrested and charged with the murder. He went to trial, and he was convicted. The evidence was very solid against him. And he would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And he would die in prison in 2014. All for ranking people on a top hits list. That is insane to me. The things that people do for the dumbest reasons. Like, really? Because someone wanted their name higher up on the list. And by the way, these people who basically paid to have their names put up higher, they only paid like $1,500, less than that. One guy paid $2,000, but they said that was the most that was ever paid. $2,000 and less. And a man had to die for it. Sammy is still alive to this day, and he is still performing. Probably not where he would have been had this incident not have happened, but he is still happy to be alive, and he is still doing his thing. Kevin's mother passed away in 2020, so thankfully she was able to see her son get the justice he deserved. And that is it for today's story. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, if you want to see shorter form true crime stuff, like I say at the beginning, please follow me over on TikTok. Description below will have that information. If you want me to cover a case, please go to my link tree, which is down below in the description. Go to my case list and scroll through. There's about 4,200 names on there. Sorry. And try to find the name you want me to cover. If you're on a computer, just Control F and then type in the name at the box that comes up at the top. If you're on a phone, hit the little 3 ellipses, dots, things at the top, and then scroll down to Find and Replace, and then type in the name. Either one of those ways, you should be able to find the name on the list. Keep in mind, some names, if it's a serial killer, I have a whole serial killer section. I have a whole theme park deaths, worst deaths imaginable section. But if you do not find the name on the list, then you can email me. The email is on that document. It's also in the description below, or it's mikey@truecrimerer.com. And then send me the case, just the name, when it happened, where it happened, just some basic information so I can add it to the list. Keep in mind, I choose these cases randomly. I go through the list and I just randomly pick one. So your case could get covered this coming week, or it could get covered 3 years from now. I do that to be fair. And then lastly, if you want merch that looks like this, it says Making a True Crimerer. We have this on hoodies. We have other sayings as well. We have an owl shirt. We have wine glasses. We have mugs. We have little buttons and whatnot. So head on over to my merch store, also in the link tree below, if you would like to purchase anything. Right now we're on Etsy, but Adam, who makes my merch, and by the way, his info is below as well. He's wonderful. He is soon moving to a different merch store, but when it happens, we'll let you know. So, that being said, that is the end of today's video, and until the next case, ta-ta for now. True crime, Roonies. I don't know what that was.